Let's take you to Russia now, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has repeated his call for changes in the UN Security Council. He says it needs to have Africa representation. Ramaphosa was speaking during a plenary session with his counterparts, who had the audience of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo has been closely monitoring those engagements and joins me now live from St. Petersburg. Ziyanda, a very good afternoon to you. Some interesting revelations coming out of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa and some of the highlights. So talk us through some of the highlights and the reaction that's been garnered there.
Well, the four African leaders have been giving their various remarks in the audience, of course, of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Some speaking about a food crisis, others choosing to focus on just energy, and you'll know that we have our own just energy transition plan. But President Cyril Ramaphosa focusing largely on two areas: the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which you know has even been the theme of the African Union this year, but also in particular when it comes to peace and security. He says the geopolitical tensions have affected Africa negatively, and not referring directly, of course, to the Russia-Black Sea grain deal, but basically saying that, one, there needs to be a reform of multilateral institutions such as the UN Security Council to have African representation, but also the global financial systems. Let's listen to what he said earlier.
As South Africa, we are steadfast in our position that negotiation and dialogue and adherence to the United Nations Charter are necessary for the peaceful and just resolution of conflicts. It is our hope that constructive engagement and negotiation can bring about an end to the ongoing conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. We want to thank you, President Putin, for receiving and listening to the African leaders who came to St. Petersburg on the 17th of June, led by the Chair of the African Union, His Excellency President Azali Assoumani, where we discussed a number of issues that we believed could lead to a solution of the conflict. And we look forward to engaging further with you later today to hear precisely how some of those proposals can be taken forward.
So that's President Cyril Ramaphosa reflecting then on this continued stance of negotiation and dialogue through the African Peace Initiative when it comes to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In fact, this evening there will be a working dinner with those countries who form part of that peace initiative with Russian President Vladimir Putin after coming here in mid-June to start those negotiations. But an interesting comment coming from Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, countering what has been a discussion around an impending, food security crisis. He says, well, in Uganda there is no issue around food. They've got plenty of food. But he raised sharply the issue of access to markets, which of course would speak to the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Area and of course on other international markets. I want us to play that bite and discuss the implications of what he was actually trying to convey in his remarks this morning.
The other problem of food, which people are talking about so much, for African societies, will also be partially addressed. In Uganda, we don't have a problem of food. Uganda is a net exporter of food. Products like maize, milk, bananas, fruits, fish, cassava, not to mention beverages like coffee, tea, cocoa, vanilla, etc., are produced in big quantities, and with irrigation, bigger quantities are possible. Without irrigation, our farmers produce 5.3 tons of bananas per hectare. With irrigation and fertilizers, that production has gone 53 tons per hectare in some of the government-supported farms. It is therefore important for our partners to know that some of the African countries, such as Uganda, produce huge quantities of food, and moreover, food of unique nutritional value, beef with yellow fat, instead of the cholesterol-laden types you get from many parts of the world.
Basically, Yoweri Museveni is also implying that if the African continent was more organized, this issue of a food crisis wouldn't be so dire. But another leader next door to us at home, that's Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, basically lashing out at the West for the continued sanctions against his country, which obviously got some kind of resonance from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who's of course facing the similar kind of restrictions here in Russia. And Mnangagwa basically saying that the continued sanctions are illegal. I want us to play that bite as well.
I wish, however, to highlight that Zimbabwe remains under illegal sanctions, which were imposed by some Western countries more than 2 decades ago, just because we had decided to reunite our people with its land. Notwithstanding this, my administration, guided by its policy of engagement and re-engagement, has chosen to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. But some countries have chosen to be our detractors in spite of that policy.
Very well. Ziyanda, Ngcobo, some engaging and robust discussions taking place there at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. Of course, Ziyanda, let's perhaps leave it there for now, as we will continue to get more from what comes out of these discussions throughout the course of the day.